one less and just see what happens. Are you happy you've found your spot? Yep. Okay. I'm just going to briefly, you can see there sort of blurbs on the web, which you probably have seen before, but I'm just going to introduce you because they've all got their own stories, and we're going to have a setup where I'm going to ask them some questions, they're going to answer them, they might chat amongst themselves, and they're going to throw it out to you, and you can tweet your any questions to James, and I'll throw it to James on the way through, and we'll just see if we can come about what this balancing of life and medicine is all about. I'm going to start with Amandeep, who's actually going to say hello, Amandeep. So if you look online, there's a lot of Amandeep online. She's, I'm just going to briefly say, she's actually a leader in digital health intelligence health services in Australia, is a Bondi GP also, and has kids, and is obviously a tremendous juggler. And we'll get her to reflect on some of the work-life balance she has from a completely different direction from the rest of the physicians here. Next person I'm going to pick on is young Amy. Hi, Amy. Young Amy is a medical student. She's not as far as most of you here. She's a mother to a young son, and if some of you recognise her, that she's had a decade in news reporting, 5 years as the Australian correspondent for Agence France Press, and then decided to go into medicine. And she's obviously got her own particularly independent individual story, while she's got an 18-month boy stumbling around her. Chris, tall Chris, he's much taller than he is online. And the two of them, Bridget and Chris, are related. Meaning they're... Well, not... Okay, they're married. So... It's an important technical point. So Chris is a consultant paediatrician, has the same number of children as Bridget, and Bridget's a palliative care physician. And interestingly, which I'll go to early on, they're talking about work-life compromise, if you read them. And finally, I'm just going to throw to David. G'day, David. I didn't actually meet you, so it's lovely to see you. Introduce. Who's a general surgical registrar at RPA, a renowned painful direction to go through, and so he's going to reflect on some of those things while he's still doing a Masters of Surgical Education and juggling children. Give him a clap. Come on, we made all the way up here. So remember, if you do have any questions, could you flick them via Twitter to James, and I'll throw them from there. I'm actually going to start with you, David. Is that okay? Sure. Off the bat? Yeah. You look comfortable? Yeah, you look good? Okay. Surgical training. There's some in the audience that probably are thinking about going down this notorious training scheme. Work-life balance? How's it going?
Depends on the day. I think I was talking to my wife before I came and she said, "What do you mean?" Which says a lot. And I think probably the things that I reflected on were, you just spoke about juggling. And I'm not sure I'm so much a juggler as my wife's the catcher and stops things falling through the cracks and missing things. So I think having support both at home and mostly at home, but also...
You got a couple of little kids?
Yep.
How old are your kids?
My daughter turned 3 on Thursday and I basically missed the whole day. And my younger daughter's nearly 11 months.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
When you're a surgical trainee, I mean, maybe it's changed, but you're at RPA, and RPA is busy. It's got a high expectation of your delivery of service, and it's a prestigious place to find yourself. How do you have to do a lot of hours, like an on call for it?
Yes. My current job is not too bad, and it's probably somewhere between 55 and 60 hours a week, I guess, and then 1 in every 5 or 6 weekends you're in for the weekend as well.
How do you manage to to try and get that balance? Is there, as I say, is there a sweet spot for someone at this stage? Are you looking forward to a sweet spot when you're a private thing down the track? Or are you saying promises that you have to fulfil later in your life?
No, I think the sweet spot. I think it changes. It's fluid. It's not one particular perfect regimen, and some weeks are bad and some weeks are good, and try and communicate both at work and at home, and in terms of what's going to happen, and have a very supportive family, and just make it work.
Yeah, I think that supportive other part of your life seems like it's going to be a recurrent theme, I'd say. What I might do is I'll move on and then we'll bounce between people after that. What I might have a chat to now is the team in the corner. Now, when I spoke to you both previously, Bridget and Chris, you said that one of you had decided they're going to speak first, so that they know what it is. So Bridget, she gets the speaking first bit about how their balance is going, and then he knows what he should say. And I think that's really a bright idea. So Bridget, how long have you two been, you went through medical school together, it's a beautiful love thing. We won't go into that now, it's in Newcastle, it's a long time ago. But how many years out are the two of you now?
So we started university in 1998 and we finished in 2003, so it's 15 years.
Yeah, so and that gets you being consultants at this point. So take me through, you would have had ups and downs, but take me through how have you found a sweet spot now? Were there salty spots before it? Were there sour spots? You don't have to tell us everything, but obviously, but take me through what you could help with people who are both medical and married together.
We are definitely in a sweet spot now. Life is delightful.
Is that reflecting on how salty it was before?
It was bloody horrible before. So we're both consultants now. We have 3 children. We both work 0.6. So we have a nanny 1 day a week, but between us we almost make a full-time parent. And it's lovely to be able to love my work and love my home life. But when we were junior doctors, we were living apart. I was in Newcastle, Chris was in Sydney. We were doing long distance, working bloody horrible hours. And then registrar training was just awful. The exams are terrible. They just basically rip your life apart.
Cover your ears there if you could.
And then you come into advanced training and it's like someone turned on the lights again, and suddenly life smells better and it tastes better and it is better. And we started having children, and then we became consultants, and my God, your life as a consultant is so much better than your life at any other point, because suddenly you get choices and you get to do the interesting stuff, and the stuff you don't feel like doing is your intern and your registrar's job. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not just an oncoming train.
So it looks like that you made a decision to be 0.6 each, and were obviously able to drive that occurring, the two of you, which is not necessarily a compromise in terms of your independent view of what you should be. I don't know. Tell me about that. How did you get to that decision? Was that the precipitant to getting a sweet spot in your work life? Or take me through that.
Yeah, so 100%. So I have this really clear vision of my career in 2 phases. So there was the training part where, the biggest threat to your work life compromise is the exams and jobs and stuff. And we just worked our butts off. It was really intense. We both did the exams the same year. We were eating like frozen food that wasn't really okay to eat, and just like studying and sleeping and not that much. So that was really intense. And then we'd always planned to sort of have a balance. Bridget and I are planners. But there was a really particular moment where Bridget said to me, before we had children, before she fell pregnant, like I imagine we both work part-time as consultants. And I always remembered that, because even though I'm like in the parlance of the times, the sensitive new age guy, like I had never seen that. Even my parents, who were relatively equitable, my father worked full-time, my mother didn't work. And so it never occurred to me. So I really credit her saying that as creating a fork in the path. And I often talk to my trainees, particularly in paediatric sort of women training, you know, that even though I was very receptive to that and we've made it work, she had to bring that to the table to make me think of it. And then I had to walk down that fork, and that was quite tricky because we've been working so hard and breadth of CV, all the stuff that James was talking about, so that we could get the good jobs. So then to leave that was really challenging, I found, for my ego mostly, because it meant saying no to jobs that people had, you know, they're sweet, talk you into it, and I'd been quite successful in the exam, so people were wanting to see me work 100 hours a week and take on the prestigious roles, and then for me to step back and say, no, I'm taking 12 months off, so my wife can finish her training. We've got a 9-month-old boy, and so I'll be a full-time parent, and she'll go back to work full-time, and that's how we made it through. And so if you know a little bit about our story, you know, we graduated as physicians on the same day with 2 children, now 3, and for, like, typically, the woman, of course, would fall further and further behind. That would be a more common story. So that, Bridget made that happen, then we walked down it together, but it continues to be actually a bit of an ego hit to pass up opportunities that I see people I studied with, particularly, who are like, you know, going to get the Nobel Prize for incredible research into cancer. And the compromise for me, why I insist on saying compromise now rather than balance, is I'm not the father I'd want to be, and I'm not the paediatrician I would want to be, but I'm closer to both of them than I could be if I was just one or the other.
But can I say that you're the person that you should be?
I'm pretty much as attractive as I'd always thought I would be.
You are.
I'm definitely not the person I want to be. No, I'm putting myself down all the time.
I'm sorry to be positive, but but you seem to me as the couple that you've made tough decisions and found, as you both said at the beginning, a sweet spot. Like, it's sweet now, it's gonna stay sweet, but you will not get the Nobel Prize for this. You might get something else. I'm not saying you can't write, but you sound like you're finding a spot and you're both happy. One of you's happy.
And I always check.
Am I happy now? Ask Bridget if you're happy. That's what I do with my wife.
We're happy. I'm happy.
You're happy.
I'm happy.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are different ways, and that balance of ego and drive and expectation, and because everyone in the room, you know, they're all high achievers, aren't they? Look at them. You know, boys and girls are all high achievers, and they've all got expectations from their parents and grandparents that they're going to be. My father still thinks I should be a professor. Doesn't care whether it's an associate professor. Doesn't care whether I buy it from Wollongong University. Doesn't care what it is. It's just being recorded. But I'm sitting there going, I don't want to do that. I know it. And so he will go to his grave disappointed. He's not dead yet, but he'll die soon. So let's move on, because Amandeep, you've got a very different, I'm guessing, a very different projection of where you've gone and decisions you've made. Can you take us through that? Because I'm sure that those in the audience don't really know. It will.
So I went to medical school with these 2. So I think what's really interesting is, you know, where we've all ended up, and a bit like Sarah, and I remember having a coffee with her, we said the same thing to each other, where if we went back and sat in this room where you are now and said, where will we be in, you know, 15, 20 years, we could not have predicted, and I certainly couldn't have predicted where I've ended up. But part of my story, I think, changed because life happens to you. You have a career path that you think you're going to take, but you've got to remember that your career in medicine doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have relationships, you have family things, you have illnesses, you have all sorts of stuff that happens, and that actually shapes what you end up choosing at the time, and you make the decision that's right for you at the time. So I went through medical school with these guys. I did my couple of years of junior doctor years, and I had this thought that I was either going to be an ED physician or I was going to do ID, because it just couldn't work out the first letter. But one of those. And then life happened, and I, you know, met somebody, and then I ended up getting pregnant a lot earlier in my career than I thought. So I was a junior doctor, hadn't thought about, getting onto training programs, and here I was about to have a child, and it was quite freaky, and I was, really struggling with choices and decisions at that point. But I am so grateful that I decided to stick with the child part of it, because she's now 11 and awesome. But I actually changed what I was going to do at that time, and I thought back then that the only thing I could do was general practice, because people, it wasn't working.
There you go. I chose general practice because back then people told me that's all you could do if you were going to, be a mother at a young stage in your career. And I feel a bit sad that that was a message we were telling people back then, and I hope nobody in this room feels that way. I hope you all feel like you can have a family and achieve whatever you want to achieve, and these guys are a testament to that. But having said that, general practice was not a bad decision for me. It opened up my world. I ended up doing all sorts of amazing, crazy things, setting up telehealth services in the Philippines, consulting to digital health companies in the United States. I have travelled the world, and I have worked in so many interesting places, and I wouldn't have done that, I think, if I had chosen a different path. I would have done other amazing things, but I definitely think that allowing life to happen and having children has given me this amazing path that I've ended up with.
Do you think that's because you've got an optimistic view of the world and yourself, or you've got an ego that's able to take these smacks in the head potentially and make them positive, or is it because you're forced to it and then things happen? What do you think? Is it?
I think it's definitely the optimistic thing. I think I see everything that's presented to me as an opportunity. It may not look like it's where I want it to be, but I think, okay, I don't know where this is going to lead, but let's just give it a go. And most things you can change. So you go and try something, you don't like it. You can't do that with kids, unfortunately. You can't return them, but they usually turn out okay. But with everything else, career-wise, you can. And I have seen people change careers. I have seen psychiatrists go back and start emergency medicine training in their 40s. I have seen GPs decide that they want to become anaesthetist. It's not a one-way street that you can never turn around and go back. And the other thing to remember is that your years of being able to have a family, usually around sort of 20 years if you're lucky, but your career, you could be working for 50 odd years. So, make sure you put the right things first, the priorities are correct.
Yeah. Which, I'll go to the what time you think children could ideally put in your career, but first I just want to, it's going to be to you next, you're the person who's speaking to you. I did read some stuff online, and you've done some podcasts talking about your story, but they don't know any of that. Could you just summarise how the hell you got to this point? Because I must admit, I looked at it and I went, oh, that's a pretty interesting story, if you're happy to.
Sure. So, I'm in 5th year med school now, so I'm at the pointy end of things, which is exciting, but also really terrifying. I'm sure you're just out of the woods of that kind of, you remember what it was like. I came into medicine later, so I was about 30, I guess, when I made the decision to sit the exam and do it. And I sort of made a bargain with myself that I'd sit the exam, and if I got in, I'd go, and if I didn't get in, I wasn't going to keep trying. I would just let it go. So, I was really lucky in that I got in, but it meant I kind of had to do it. And so I took the plunge. But I sort of related to something that Sarah said before a little bit about a door opening and going through it. I'm that person. Like, whenever a door opens, I'll go through it, foolishly or otherwise. I had a 10-year career before I went to med school as a journalist, so very different. And when I tell people that's what I did before, I normally get this question pretty early on in a rotation, and I always wonder what makes people tick onto it. And sometimes it's like, oh, you just look a bit older, or, you're just a bit more confident, or you ask more questions, or so said, you take a lot more notes than the other students, which might just be like a mature age student nerd thing. But so I always get this question, and the reaction universally pretty much is, wow, that's a really big change, like going from what's perceived to be like a very artsy humanities thing to science. And you know, people ask me how I found that, and it was bloody hard. Hey, it was like a really steep learning curve, and particularly when you're coming into it with all these people who are fresh out of school and they've done like all the sciences and they're super intelligent. Hey, like every person in this room is like, we are I won't count myself in this, but like the top 5% of like the top 1% or whatever. And I think it creates a strange environment sometimes where people lose perspective about that. And the other question I always get asked is, why? You know, like how and why did you come to that decision to leave journalism and come into medicine? They seem to be drastically different things. Actually, they're really not so different in some ways. So they both involve like being with people, you know, hearing people's stories. And I guess what brought me to the decision that I wanted to do something else with that skill set was I went to a succession of disasters in the latter years of my journalism career, and I kept finding myself, you know, at a bushfire or a tsunami or an earthquake, watching people there in the capacity of the Red Cross and other medical volunteers, and relating more and more to the feeling that I wanted to be there. I wanted to be the person who was doing something rather than, you know, witnessing and reporting, which is a really important thing, but I felt like I needed to do something more with, I guess, my time and energy. So that's what drove me off the cliff, so to speak, into med school, and here I am.
And here you are. And so because of the timing, I will actually ask the question about kids, because most of you end up having kids, I suppose. And I know that when I've got a couple of kids who are finishing uni, I know you gasp of them. No, you say. No, that's true. But we had to make a decision, you know, vaguely about when we were going to have kids and who would be working, all those sort of things. Is there a sweet time to have children, or is it just when you have them, just life happens around it? What's the general feeling? I might go to you first because you're in the nastiest spot. Well, no. I mean, you're at a beautiful time, but you do have a couple of short ones, and you did miss a birthday not long ago. So tell me, you and your partner decided to have children in this time of registrar time, and in relatively, you should be in your late 20s, early 30s, that sort of time frame. What went you through that sort of decision? If you want to tell them, if you don't answer.
So, no, I don't think there's a right time or a wrong time, is probably the number one thing I'd say. I think probably the bigger question is you decide whether you want to have children, and then, you know, I don't think there's a right time. You know, we decided that we wanted to have children and we were ready and all that sort of thing, and we did it. And, you know, our second daughter was born in June last year, and in August I went to Dubbo for 6 months and they didn't come. And I'd go home on the weekends, and one weekend I remember leaving in the afternoon on Sunday to drive back, and my elder daughter, who was 2, just said, "Thank you very much for visiting." That was a bit heartbreaking, but you know, I don't think there's I don't think there's a right time. I think you just make a decision that you want to do it, and you do it, and we just make it work.
And you make it work. Find ways that you can make it work. Tick it over. Make everyone as happy as you can while you're doing it. Maybe the couple in the corner. You sound like you both planned this beautifully. It was at a planned timing.
I'm a planner.
Yeah, and not deny it. Yeah. Palliative care, you could plan my death.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that later. Look, I'm a planner, but I was also very lucky. So the main thing that I wanted to try and avoid, if possible, was around the time of the exam, because frankly I found the physician's exam really awful and really unpleasant, and frankly I don't think I would have passed having a baby at that time, but I think that you've got to make it work for your fertility as well. So we had babies, 2 babies in advanced training and 1 baby when I was staff specialist. But frankly, our 3rd child, it took us a while longer to get pregnant. And actually, if I'd been starting to have children at that age, which was 36, it actually would have been a lot more challenging. And I've got a lot of colleagues who have gone through a lot of cycles of IVF, and that's been really heartbreaking. So I think that it's just got to work for your life and your fertility. And if it's possible to avoid that exam time, then do.
Yeah, because same with me. I've got friends that were registrars of mine that had made decisions to wait until they've got a consultant, and then everyone says it's all fine, but then you realise that it drops off no matter what the ads say, and everything else. It is harder to conceive when you're older, and so the other 2 of you have got kids. Again, what was your decision-making sort of process for that, Amandeep? You were saying before that you had a child very early, and so that sort of drove sort of your decision-making process. Do you have friends that had waited later, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I actually felt a bit isolated, I think, having kids early, because most of our cohort probably would have had them around the time you guys had them. So it was like I was the first one to sort of go through.
Was it difficult? Was it difficult because you were outside the immediate bell curve of medicine?
Yeah, I was, and people would sort of say, you're very young, although I wasn't young. If you go to other parts of Western Sydney, I would have been...
You're an old, probably a grandparent.
Yes.
Again, it's not good curriculum, is it?
I should laugh. I mean, I was working at an AMS and I had, teenagers who were pregnant at the same time as me. But, so then I guess naturally I went and had the second one.
Did you find it hard to get support from your peers around that time? I mean, because there are going to be people who will make decisions and then some things they'll just get pregnant at that stage. Were there ways that you would think that that group could get support? Is it support with your friends or?
Yeah, I mean, I did, again, felt very isolated, but I think it was because we didn't have social media back then, showing my age, but we didn't have groups that they have now that you can, there's a very significant social media group called Medical Parents of Australia and New Zealand. We actually had a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I love how all the medical parents get on there and ask each other questions and silly questions or what they think might be silly, and they get a real collegiate sort of supportive environment. I didn't have that, and
because it's really hard if you get isolated. Even if you've got 2 parents and one's working all the time and one's at home, it's bloody hard.
Yeah.
If you're in a place and you grew up somewhere else and you've come to Sydney and haven't got that support around you. Yeah. I mean, we had similar sort of thing. It's freaking hard.
It is, and you're used to working and suddenly you're at home and you're not feeling mentally stimulated. Yeah. And I had a partner who was going through physician's exams at the time, so not only was he working all the time, but he was studying when he was home. So it was a challenge. But I think we both, in hindsight, wouldn't have done it any other way. We were.
And now you would recommend that perhaps those people, if they find themselves or even isolated at home, at some point or by themselves with their children, whether male or female or whatever, that the social media.
Yeah, social media.
Could be a platform that can really help.
Find other medical parents. There'll be other people who are off on maternity leave. Go and have coffee with them. Get your,
your social contacts.
Yeah, keep that up. I think don't keep yourself cooped up at home.
Yeah. I mean, your decision. I mean, you're obviously much older. And I think you said your child's not that tall.
He's 18 months. Yeah.
About that. Yeah. So you just made the decision to have a child, and you would take us through the idea of what made that decision. You've gone through this long or reasonably long career in journalism, and then you jumped off the cliff, and then you've decided, bugger it, I'm going to take this next jump.
Yeah, I like challenges. So I guess we had a bit of a different decision-making process. So I have a female partner, so we had to find a donor. We didn't have to, but we wanted to have a known donor, so it was a much longer process. So I actually started thinking about this, and we were already talking about it before I went to med school. And actually, in the first week at med school, I went and saw someone in the faculty and said, I want to have a child, like when is the best time to do this? Like if I wanted to take time off, when would it work, etc. And she basically said, look, my advice is you need to wait at least 2 years, like get through the first 2 years and then it's much easier. And I thought, no, bugger you, I'm going to start now. So I started IVF within a few months, but it actually took a really long time for various reasons. And I actually didn't end up getting pregnant until around the beginning of third year. And that worked out kind of well in that I popped out the baby at the end of third year. It was unfortunately like a month before exams, which wasn't ideal. But the faculty were quite good actually. Like they organised a room where I could breastfeed just before I went into the exams, and like they were quite good. And I got through that somehow. And then we had to make a decision about whether I would take a year off. And at UNSW where I'm studying, fourth year is a research year, so I just decided to keep going, which was a challenge. I was at home all year on my own, doing a research project in gynae cancer, and so I was in the lab 2 days a week and at home 3 days, and then in the second semester I was at the lab 3 days and home 2 days, and that was kind of awesome, I didn't have to take a year off, I kind of could keep going, I got to have home life and do uni, and this year's been like a bit of a challenge because he's in daycare 5 days a week now and doing like the working parent thing. And so we moved to Albury at the beginning of this year, and he's the only kid in his whole daycare, and it's a country town, that is in there 5 days a week, even amongst the toddlers and stuff. And there was definitely a little bit of judgment from some of the other parents about the fact that, he was there so long. And that was weird for me because in Sydney, it's just the norm. Like, you guys probably haven't come up against this yet, but everyone's kids...
Only 5 days.
Not 7. But the thing I think that's really hard, and probably everyone on the panel can relate to this, is you just get to the point where you realise you're just not really very good at anything. Like, you want to be a good student, but you can just be average at best. You want to be a good parent, but you can just be average at best. And when I'm at uni and at the hospital, I spend the whole time thinking about how I miss him and I wish I was spending time with him and I wish I was at home. And then when I'm with him, I'm thinking I'm getting really stressed about study that I'm not doing, or, things that experiences that I'm not having. And I think, it's heaps of it's about a mindset. It's about changing your expectations and like loving yourself for who you are. I don't know, like understanding that, you're doing the best that you can and that this is temporary. And unfortunately for me, the problem is that I've still got the worst. Like I've got your situation like ahead of me, and I don't know, I can't give you any advice on how to face that. But what I would say is I think lowering your expectations or just changing your expectations will stand you in good stead, and probably like outside of parenting if you want to do other things in your life as well. And I think you absolutely must. You absolutely must do things outside of medicine. I think that's a really interesting thing that I've noticed coming into a course where there's lots of school leavers and there's a few other mature age students, but we're certainly in the minority, that people are just so caught up in finishing and, like getting to the next thing, and this thing that you're saying about setting goals, meeting goals, setting goals, meeting goals. And I think you have a very different perspective if you've done stuff before you've come into med school. And then once you have kids, it certainly gives you a different perspective. And it would be great if you could have that perspective now, is what I would say. Yeah.
That expectation, the expectation or altering your expectation of perfection in all components of your existence, I think it seems to be a general thing. Is that true from the group, do you think? Or, you're all high achievers, as you are, and so you're used to winning. You're used to ticking the boxes and being the chosen one. But it gets more complicated as you get further and maybe having to adapt slightly. Yeah.
So I'd just like to share. Do I have the button?
No, it doesn't look like you've got the.
So a really concrete example, because I think I agree with everything that Amy said, but a really concrete example. So David's child said thank you for visiting, which is a beautiful and heartbreaking thing to say. And last week, a couple of weeks ago, I took a toy off my child for being rude to the nanny, and he said, "I will strangle you." I don't know how the 4-year-old learned that phrase, but this is that reflects...
I thought they were going to say, "I will tell Daddy." That would be worse.
He visits the Days Islam at work. So, but that's like the pointy end of the compromise. Yeah, like no one feels good about that. I didn't feel good about that. Why were you so rude to the nanny? Why am I having to chastise you with this? And then where did that come from? Horrific. And like Amy has said, so there are, amongst our peers generally, it's a gross overdramatisation, but there are two cohorts of parents that I see. Parents who will push hard in certain parts of their career, which is what we did. So our son had terrible nanny, fine grandmother, terrible nanny, daycare, 5 days a week. That was for a year while we were both trying to finish our training. And that was the right time to do that for us, because then we were ready for jobs and jobs came our way. But then there's very much a large cohort of people who just keep going, part-time. It takes them 10, 15 years to finish their training. And there are always jobs at the end as well. But I think both are okay. It's just about being strategic. So you don't want to do the push all the time. But like Amy, like you're a year ahead. Maybe that matters, maybe that doesn't, but maybe that gives you other opportunities for more children or different things. So do you regret working through that year, I guess would be the big question for me.
Like you say, I guess we do want to have more kids, and it's about being pragmatic. It's about saving that year off, like hopefully for next year or the year after, whenever we manage to get pregnant again. Do I regret not staying at home with him 5 days? I think I struck a good balance. Like I think I was there with him enough. It was awful putting him into daycare at like 6 months old. He was, but there were kids there who were there from 6 weeks old. So not that it's not a competition. That's not like, I'm better than they are. It's just, it's never easy. I think you do always have regrets, and it's important to listen to those when they grab you, because they're trying to tell you something, but not to always listen to them, because they're not always useful. Like I think sometimes, you can eat yourself up and it's not helpful.
Yeah, so obviously as a paediatrician, people often ask me advice about parenting. So my only piece of advice to all the parents I see is that the process of parenting is the daily experience of failing to meet your own expectations. That's normal, right? I never feel like. And so I think once this goes to expectations and goals and success, and we're not all going to win the Nobel Prize, and very particularly, we were asked to submit a bio. So my bio says father and paediatrician. Like it could say way more stuff, and that's super cool. And lots of people here have amazing bios, but like way back when, that would have been enough for me. It's like when you're in this sort of weird microcosm that we live in, the top whatever percent, and we're all very driven. It's weird just to leave it at that, but that is still an amazing achievement, right? Mm. Like all of us have that. Just those 2 or 3 words, that's enough. That's a lot.
I think you got 2 questions. Can't see that. Oh.
It's for Amy.
It's for Amy. I've got one word for you while they're doing that. Triplets.
It was like, let's have twins and just get it over with. And I was like, it's easy for you to say, you're not doing the hard work. Yes.
Look, there wasn't too many questions through Twitter. There was a comment about David Coker. You obviously said these were 2 children and doing surgical training. Did you somehow forget to wear socks today?
That is trendy. I should know. I've got socks on. I know about no trend. That is trendy. And that's Chris Hemsworth.
And this one's for Amy, particularly for you. If you were a fruit, what would you be and why?
Revenge.
Inside joke.
Okay, on that fruity final note, we'll draw it to a go. Now, I just would like everyone to have just one final thing they'd like to impart. Well, just to say to the group, remember that they probably don't have kids. And is there one thing that you think we should finish on? Just each person, and then we'll close it. Amy, you're on this. I always ignore you to the end so you can start.
Damn it.
Maybe I'll go with Bridget, then you can think. Bridget, you can start.
It's delightful.
There you
It's
go.
delightful to have children. It's delightful to have a work-life compromise, and it won't happen all of the time, but that's okay. It's something to work towards.
Okay.
My thing is it doesn't have to be children. I found that was the thing that got me off the train, but it doesn't have to be children. It's okay to say, this is my passion, I'm doing this instead. So go for it.
Yeah.
What was the question?
Luckily it wasn't a question, it's really easy. Just what do you want to tell them about your experience?
I was just trying to be one of those high achievers.
No, you've done well to this point.
So my message is, you've got one life and you've got probably 1,000 billion things you want to do in it, and don't make medicine and your career the only thing that you do. just open your world.
I agree with all those things probably as a starting point. I think, thinking about this idea of the sweet spot, I do think the sweet spot changes. I think the sweet spot when you're trying to do exams is just trying to get through exams, and you have to compromise. And then I think the sweet spot on the good weeks is when you walk out of work and you don't think about it and you're just present with your family and things like that.
In the moment.
Yeah.
Amy?
Yeah, I was going to say that basically, rather than spending the time when you're doing something, thinking about the other thing or wishing you were somewhere else, like make the most of where you are in that moment. So for me, it's like when I'm at the hospital, just be there and just like really, be engaged and know that, like, make the most of being that time so that when I'm at home, I can just be there. And like, for you, you're at home, 2 days a week or something, like just sap the life out of those 2 days. And that's what I can do when I get home from the hospital, is just do no uni work and just be with my kid for a few hours, put him to bed, read him his stories, and just, let that be enough.
I thought it was quite ironic that we're on a Saturday afternoon talking about work-life balance. But I'll let that go through to the keep. Could you please all give a